Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to talk about some line combinations. We're going to go through the forward lines here one by one on what I think that they should be, and then obviously we'll talk about things, but we're going to use a picture of Carlton the Bear in an old Maple Leafs jersey to build suspense here. You guys can just kind of stare into his cold, black, lifeless eyes as we go through this one by one. The first line. Now, there's a couple of things here. There is a section of the fan base that would like to see William Nylander reunited with Austin Matthews from the first couple of seasons that duo played together. And then there's Michael Bunting. He's from Scarborough. He's a little bit of a pest. He's a smaller forward. He works really hard. He gets in along the boards. He does that sort of dirty work. He does go to the front of the net. And he did play in the Arizona Coyotes top six last season for the small amount of games that he did get into. But a narrative that has been thrown around this offseason is that now that Zach Hyman is gone, Matthews and Marner are going to need to learn how to do without. And I don't disagree with that because the numbers do show that they were better when Zach Hyman was playing with them. But without Zach Hyman, they still formed some of the better, more effective lines in the NHL during the regular season last year. 3 out of the top 24 lines on MoneyPuck.com, a minimum of 50 minutes spent together last year, were with Matthews and Marner. Foligno, Matthews, Marner in a smaller sample size was one of the best lines in the NHL last season, but again, okay, yeah, that was just a small sample size. The time that they spent with Zach Hyman is right there, and just below that was the time that they spent with Joe Thornton. In the dozen or so games that they spent with Alex Galchenyuk on their wing wasn't that bad either. That would mean 4 out of the top 46 lines on MoneyPuck.com, according to expected goals percentage, featured Matthews and Marner. And if you're looking at the isolated impacts for Michael Bunting on the Arizona Coyotes last season, they were a much better team with him on the ice versus off the ice, offensively, defensively, and on the power play, and he played in their top six. For my second line, I'm going to go with William Nylander, John Tavares, and Alex Kerfoot. Obviously, the first two aren't very shocking, but Alex Kerfoot, there may be some other options that you could go to other than him in the top six, so why him? If you noticed when I was talking about Matthews and Marner, I highlighted this line in the background there, and it's because they were one of the more effective lines in the NHL last season as well when they got to play together. If we're looking at Tavares' most common line mates, obviously Nylander being the most common, but the second most common from last season was Alex Galchenyuk, and the line was fairly efficient. They scored more goals than what they allowed, and they controlled the majority of the expected goals for there, but the second most common line mate from last season was also the most common from the season before that. It was Alex Kerfoot. In 36 games from the start of the season until the end of March, Tavares had 28 points in 36 games, but his next 20 from April onwards, he would have 9 goals and 22 points in 20 games. It's more like the John Tavares that we know. But even in that 36-game sample, he was still 9th in the NHL in forwards in independent scoring chances 4 per 60. He was still getting the opportunities, they just weren't going in. But let's use our hockey brains here for a second, and it's not a slide on Alex Galchenyuk, is the reason why John Tavares had more actual goals from April until the end of the season because he was playing with Galchenyuk, or did he just get more puck luck? So that line combination of Kerfoot, Tavares, and Nylander showed last season that they were capable of preventing goals, right? Controlling the majority of the shot attempt share, controlling the majority of the expected goals for. They spent a lot of time together during the 1920 season. With some more puck luck, I can expect them to score more together. And let's all not forget this quote from earlier on in the offseason where Kyle Dubas said, "In signing David Kampf, it allows us to be more flexible. You could potentially put Alex Kerfoot onto the wing as needed." Now, here's where a lot of people get bent out of shape here, and yes, that is the third line on Cap Friendly, but I'm going to call the third and the fourth line the bottom six. You use them situationally. And maybe it's going to be a little bit unpopular to have Nick Ritchie outside of the top six because he is a bigger body, but I think he'll get his opportunities to play with that top six group on the power play. And it's not that I don't like Nick Ritchie, but if you look at the way that Boston deployed him last season and used him, out of their regular forwards, he didn't really spend very much time against elite competition last year. And when he did, it was with David Krejci, Craig Smith, or David Pastrnak, and at that point, relative to the rest of his teammates here, Nick Ritchie wasn't really helping that line out. He wasn't really a huge detriment either, but he wasn't really driving that line. But that's okay. Just because a player doesn't have the greatest underlying numbers, it doesn't mean that he's bad. Not every player on every line needs to be a play driver. Sometimes it's okay to just be a complementary player on a good line. So when it comes to Nick Ritchie potentially being a complementary piece that we can see maybe next to Tavares and Nylander or Matthews and Marner, I don't think that he has a good enough shot to justify it. He definitely does have the size, but then he's not the greatest defensive player. I would much rather see this player get to use his size on the power play in front of the net, which is something that the Maple Leafs haven't had in a number of years, maybe since James Van Riemsdyk left. But at 5-on-5, I would rather see him in a sheltered offensive role, which is similar to how Boston used him last season. And then that last line there of Ilya Mikheyev, David Kampf, and Ondrej Kase would be more of a shutdown line, more of a defensive line in my bottom six. But I think this defensive line is really interesting because here's where maybe you can convince me to maybe put a guy like Nick Ritchie in the top six over a guy like Alex Kerfoot because of a guy like David Kampf and how he was used when playing in Chicago. Jack Hand wrote a really interesting article that I'll leave linked in the description of this video talking about how David Kampf was paired up with Dominik Kubalik, and Kubalik is not a defensively minded player at all. In fact, he's quite bad defensively. He's more of an offensive player, but he talked about how David Kampf is a player who is able to jump up in the rush as a secondary player and provide a lot of support and be responsible defensively against other teams' top players. And I think what the Maple Leafs learned last season is that your shutdown line obviously needs to be good defensively, but it can't give you nothing offensively, especially in the playoffs when your top guys are being targeted. And if Kampf is able to play well defensively against other teams' top-end players, which is what he did in Chicago last year relative to the rest of his teammates, but also jump into the rush as a secondary option and provide support there, you may be able to squeak a little bit more offense out of that shutdown line. And maybe that's where that quote from Kyle Dubas on Alex Kerfoot earlier in the offseason was going when he talked about moving him from being their shutdown center to the wing. You move him to the wing, you free him up a little bit, and that allows him to use his skating and his playmaking ability a little bit more to generate some offense. And a guy like Ondrej Kase, when he is healthy, can provide you with steady defense, but also be a scoring threat. And if that's the case, I'm okay with doing something like this. And maybe that makes a guy like Ilya Mikheyev expendable because you're able to get someone a little bit more offensively minded to play with both Jason Spezza and Adam Brooks. Maybe that also makes a guy like Pierre Engvall expendable. And something to point out here is that this roster is currently not cap compliant. And there's no one from the forward group that wouldn't require waivers. And this is also with Wayne Simmonds as a healthy scratch here. I imagine that he factors into their lineup somewhere, somehow. They do have a lot of players, and it's not a slight on him. Maybe they just don't need him necessarily every single night. What he does bring to the team is very valuable, but at the same time, I didn't really notice him at all in that series against the Montreal Canadiens. And he doesn't kill penalties, and aside from the first 15 or so games, he wasn't very effective on the Maple Leafs' power play, especially on the entries. But to expect to get through training camp, having everyone 100% healthy, may be a little bit unrealistic, so maybe they start the season using LTIR. But at the same time, Dubas has expressed that he would like to not use LTIR because it makes it very difficult to make in-season trades because you can't accumulate or accrue cap space. So maybe he rolls the dice and places someone like Pierre Engvall on waivers. Maybe it's a guy like Adam Brooks, but I wouldn't like that all too much. I really liked what we saw from him last year in the limited number of games he was able to get into. And if I had to pick between the both of them, I don't know who I would pick. They're both good skaters, but they're different skaters. Mikheyev goes north-south, Engvall goes east and west. They both kill penalties. Mikheyev generates a lot of scoring chances, but neither of them really score a whole lot. Engvall does play center. That is valuable. I think it's going to be interesting to see the cap management day in and day out of this team because how efficient they are at it is going to determine how much they can add at the trade deadline, right? We've shown that you can add a lot with very little, because players' salaries are prorated and you can get 50% salary retained or double salary retention. But at the same time, this team is not as good as what it was on paper last year. I mean, I like the goaltending a little bit more. I like the defense a little bit more because Rasmus Sandin is going to get more games, more of an opportunity, but the forward core is definitely not as good. But the interesting thing about this team is that they can take a step back in the regular season, and take a step forward in the playoffs if Matthews and Marner decide that they want to show up. And if that's going to be the case, I don't think anybody cares whether they finish second, third, or in a wild card spot. Okay, maybe not a wild card spot. I don't want to have to play Tampa in the first round. I don't want to have to play Tampa in the first round. Right now, they got a lot of maybes, and that's what I said that they needed heading into free agency. Guys like Andre Kasha and Michael Bunting and Nick Ritchie, can one or two or even all of those guys put down roots somewhere in this lineup and fill a role? Can you get some development from guys like Rasmus Sandin and Timothy Liljegren or Nick Robertson? Can those guys be factors? Can they go out and get someone at the deadline to really bolster the forward core? I don't know. You start thinking about those things, and if they get a little bit of luck, right? Because that's what it's going to come down to. If they get a little bit of luck, you can see how they're starting to build some depth. And the thing that kills me, and if you're still watching at this point in the video, you guys are one of the hardcores, so make sure to drop me a like on the video if you did like it. But I believe I'm remembering this correctly. I think they outscored Montreal 17-14 in that 7-game series without Matthews and Marner on the ice. It's just that those two guys didn't score. And it's like, I don't care what the depth is, right? If your two best players, it doesn't matter how much you're paying them. If your two best forwards do not score, you're going to lose, right? Tampa Bay would not have won the Stanley Cup if they got nothing from Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov. It's just they wouldn't have won. Doesn't matter how well you allocate your salary cap. Your best players, your best forwards, they need to score. And the way that I've been feeling towards the team is whenever I want to say something good about them, I need to preface it with something bad, like the salary cap or Matthews and Marner not scoring. And that's awful. I shouldn't feel that way, and even if I do, I shouldn't do it. Right? I shouldn't say it, because then it projects onto everyone else, and it just compounds and makes the problem worse. But maybe that's just being objective. But at the same time, you scroll through the comment section and the majority of them are negative. And I do a video talking about what's wrong with the team, what's their problem, right across the thumbnail. And it gets less views than the videos that I try to be positive in. So what does that tell me? People want to be positive about this team, but they're so friggin' traumatized that they can't be. And I think something that's really interesting for me in doing this channel is that I get to read and interact and see a lot of different point of views from people who are all different ages too. And that's the thing that impresses me the most about this channel. And this really is the end. The end of this video is for the hardcore people that make it all the way to the end all the time. In seeing that, from ages 18 to 60, everybody's represented basically evenly. And that to me is impressive. I mean, I'm 23, and the fact that we can get a group together so diverse in terms of age and experiences with this team and watching and being a fan, I think is really impressive, and it makes reading the comments so much more interesting. Make sure to like the video if you did like it, and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And I know I haven't posted too much here in the month of August, but I still am here, and I am responding to comments here and there as they come in and stuff like that. I just figured take some time, enjoy it, right? This is going to be a really, really busy year with the Olympics and everything. I'm going back to school and stuff like that. I have one more year left. Figure just take some time, enjoy it, right? I think everyone could use a little bit of a break from the Leafs anyway. So I'll see you guys in the next one.